Some old LEGO Ninjago sets and figures have more than doubled in price in just the span of a few months, but we're already starting to see some of them come back down. With the theme's 15th anniversary hype, collectors and resellers were rushing to buy everything they could, but as demand starts to stagnate, prices are naturally beginning to fall. Today we're breaking down what's really happening with the LEGO Ninjago market and what it means for the entire LEGO secondary market. Ninjago started in 2011 with its first wave of sets alongside an accompanying TV show. It was an immediate hit, especially for younger kids like myself. Fast forward to 2026 and the 19th season is currently airing, along with over 500 sets released throughout the theme's history. Naturally, a lot of those original fans are now adults and many are revisiting the theme because of the anniversary. Of course, a big influx of adult collectors means more people with money to spend. On top of that, those people have nostalgia for the sets they grew up with. When you combine higher demand with a limited supply, prices naturally start to rise. With most major collectibles, there's a cycle you'll notice. Prices start going up, people get worried they'll miss out, they then rush to buy before prices climb even higher. That pushes prices up faster, which creates even more FOMO and brings in even more buyers. Eventually, things reach a point where collectors simply aren't willing to pay those prices anymore. Now, if something was genuinely rare to begin with, there's a good chance it stays expensive. Figures like Comic-Con exclusives, unreleased characters like Mei from Overwatch, or limited run figures like Finch Dallo are good examples. But most Ninjago figures weren't produced in tiny numbers, which is why I think a lot of them will eventually come back down. I think a major issue is that prices weren't just naturally going up though. A lot of these figures get passed between multiple resellers until the price reaches a point most people aren't willing to pay. But once the only copies left are listed at inflated prices, some collectors still buy them, which helps keep those prices elevated. Before we look at any specific figures, there's one really important thing to understand. A listing price isn't the same thing as a market value. I can list a minifigure for $1,000 tomorrow, but that doesn't mean it's worth $1,000. What really matters is what people are consistently paying. There's also a big difference between a few outlier sales and the average price of something, especially because sellers could theoretically buy their own items at a higher price to make something look like it's selling for higher. One of the biggest examples of a difference between listed price and selling price is the so-called $1,000 Lloyd DX. At this point though, I think we're already seeing the pendulum swing in the other direction. Sure, on Bricklink, the cheapest copies are still listed around $500, but if we look at recent eBay sales, they're actually selling for closer to $200 to $400 consistently. That's roughly where the figure was before the massive spike. If you only checked Bricklink listings though, you'd probably assume it was worth a couple hundred more, and if you checked Bricklink listings during his peak, you might think he's worth about $1,000. JDX tells a similar story. Right now, there aren't any US Bricklink listings under $198, but if we check eBay, one sold just the other day for under $90. Looking at Bricklink's 6-month sale history, plenty have sold in the $50 to $80 range as well. If you only looked at today's listings, you'd think this is a $200 figure. In reality, a lot of the cheaper supply has simply been bought up, making the remaining listings look far more valuable than they actually are. Honestly, this whole situation reminds me a lot of Pokemon back in 2020. As prices started rising, more and more people jumped in hoping to make money. For a lot of people, collecting was less about enjoying the hobby and more about chasing whatever was increasing in value. Now obviously, LEGO and Pokemon aren't exactly the same, but I think we're seeing some similar behavior. As certain Ninjago figures start climbing in price, people rush to buy them because they think they'll be worth more later on. That creates even more demand, which pushes prices even higher. Let's look at a few examples that seem to show exactly that happening. Let's look at another valuable Ninjago figure, Acronix. On Bricklink, we can see a seller with 7 of them listed for around $150 each. If we look at the purchase history, we'll see 6 sold for just under $68 a while ago. I can't concretely prove it's this exact seller buying and relisting them, but it looks pretty strange, especially when it's a figure whose value has more than doubled in just a few months. This brings up another issue when looking at sales data. Imagine a reseller buys a Lloyd DX for $300. They then relist it for $400. Another reseller buys it and relists it for $500. Then somebody else buys it and relists it for $600. On paper, it looks like multiple successful sales and growing demand, but in reality, it could just be the same figure getting passed around between people trying to flip it for a profit. Meanwhile, there may only be one actual collector at the end of the chain who genuinely wanted it for their collection. This isn't just a trend with figures either. Even individual minifigure parts that used to be cheap are being bought and relisted like crazy. Let's take these Kai DX legs for example. In the US, the cheapest used good condition pair is listed for $12.99, which is already pretty wild considering how many sold for under $1 before this. But that's not all. If we look at the cheapest new condition listing, it's from a seller with 48 of them listed for nearly $20 each. Unfortunately, by the time I started recording this video, these sales are no longer visible in the purchase history, but I personally saw around 50 new ones sell for 99 cents each. I can't prove 100% that it's this seller, but I noticed something else while researching parts for my armies. There were 67 of these Rogue Knight Dragon Shields sold for around $2.30 each. Now there are 67 listed on this exact seller's store for $10.79. I think we can reasonably extrapolate that this seller is one of the people marking up Ninjago parts as well, especially when you see the crazy quantity of Ninjago figures they have listed. And trust me, examples like this are everywhere once you start looking for them. Now, I'd like to be clear. I don't want anyone sending hate to these sellers. My purpose in pointing these things out is to show that the market as a whole is clearly being overrun by people trying to profit from the hype. The second the anniversary hype started building, a lot of the cheap listings got bought up. Now there's just a huge number of figures and parts listed for well over double what they were selling for just a few months ago. We've actually seen something similar before. During the pandemic, a lot of LEGO Star Wars figures exploded in value as nostalgic adults re-entered the hobby. Some of those figures stayed expensive, but plenty eventually dropped down as the hype cooled off. That's one of the main reasons I think we're going to see something similar happen with Ninjago. Ninjago is obviously popular, but Star Wars has a much bigger cultural impact overall. Because of that, I would guess that a lot of these recent Ninjago price increases are being driven more by speculation and reseller activity than by long-term collector demand. Personally, I don't think we're headed for some massive crash where everything suddenly loses half its value overnight. Some figures are genuinely rare and will probably stay expensive for years, but I do think that a lot of the figures that doubled or tripled in value over the past few months are going to keep drifting downward. As more sellers compete with each other and collectors become less willing to pay inflated prices, the market will eventually settle somewhere in the middle. Honestly, I think that's a good thing. It'll make these figures more accessible to the people who actually want them, rather than the people hoping to flip them. It's kind of a terrible time to collect old Ninjago at the moment. A couple years ago, you can reasonably collect most of the figures for fairly cheap, and now a lot of them go for double or triple what their entire sets retailed for. Don't even get me started on collecting full sets or sealed sets, because some of those are so hard to come by nowadays. If you're someone currently trying to collect Ninjago, I'd recommend a few things. First, research what something is actually going for across multiple platforms. Look at Bricklink listings and sales history, look at sold and unsold eBay listings, maybe cross-reference with Mercari or whatnot, and figure out what you'd personally be willing to pay. Then set yourself a price cap and wait till you see a listing at that price point. Most of these figures are slowly dropping in value, so patience is key. Don't give in to the fear of missing out. Let me know your thoughts on this situation in the comments. Like I said, I'm pretty confident prices will continue to drop, but if you disagree, let me know why. I'm not a huge Ninjago fan myself, but I find situations like this really interesting, so let me know if you'd want to see more videos like this in the future. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe as I try to make new videos every week. As always, thank you for watching.